Welcome everyone today to this research seminar. I will be talking about what we usually call Clil, but many of you probably are also involved in English as a medium of instruction, or EMI, or might have heard about it. And Clil and EMI are of course related, and there are overlaps. So a lot of the things that I will be talking about today are relevant for EMI, or English as a medium of instruction, as well. Okay, so Clil has to be seen, content and language integrated learning, has to be seen as a type of multilingual schooling in Australia. And there's different types of multilingual schooling. There's, for example, merged curriculum schools, where we have French and German examples, where the curriculum from Germany and the curriculum from France is actually merged with the curriculum in Australia, with the Australian national curriculum, merged and harmonized to create a curriculum that actually serves both countries and the needs of both countries. Students who go to those schools, there's only a couple of them, have at the end of their training a qualification that qualifies them within the Australian curriculum, but also within the German and or French curriculum. Clil programs are part of multilingual schooling options. We also have bilingual first language schools, or indigenous schools. However, most of those bilingual first language programs are now dormant. They're not actually active, or they only exist as an after-school option. This is a different area that's very interesting as well, and to a certain extent, a very sad area that this is not being continued. We also have so-called ethnic schools, so sometimes you might hear them as Saturday schools, or sometimes referred to as Saturday schools. They usually fall under the term of ethnic schools. They are in a variety of different languages. However, they are not mainstream curriculum offerings. They are usually extra things on Saturdays and so on. In Australia, Clil refers to teaching situations in a variety of languages, with none of them as dominant as English in Asian and and European countries, or Spanish in the USA. And we'll be having a look at the different languages in a moment. So what is Clil? Have you all heard of Clil already? Yes? You're not sure? Who has actually not heard of Clil? Okay, has everybody heard of Clil? Yes, okay, good. That's great. So Clil, of course, stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning. Clil, it's a dual focus on teaching and second language, teaching a second language and teaching a key learning area, like science, social science, math, and so on. It's an internationally used term. In Australia, you also often find it referred to as second language immersion or bilingual programs at schools or in the media and so on. All of those terms are in use. Good. We have Clil programs in different settings, in different school and university settings. So there are Clil primary programs in mainstream schools, secondary programs. There's also a huge field of tertiary Clil. And there's Clil as part of international schools. Tertiary Clil is very, very big in many universities across Asia and Europe now, where you do have, and it's usually in English, where you do have most of the subject content delivered through the medium of English. And that's why I say there's often an overlap between EMI, English as a medium of instruction, and Clil. Okay, so why Clil? Why is Clil being picked up as a teaching method, or a program style, a schooling style across the world? A lot of the research shows that there are some real advantages of delivering at least part of the school curriculum in a Clil setting. Now, the European Union has actually looked at Clil across the board, and there are many, many different Clil programs now. in the European Union, many of the Clil programs are in English, but you also find a number of Clil programs in all 27 European languages. So it's kind of a mixture, but it's overwhelmingly English. It was seen as promoting high-quality gains in language proficiency, student engagement, and retention. And the international research also shows that academic achievement typically matches or surpasses monolingual approaches. So what that actually means was quite a number of studies have shown that students who study through Clil, and this is most of it is based in European research, actually also gain higher achievements in the subject that they study through Clil. So they might be studying science, they might be in Spain and studying science through the medium of English, but their science results also were lifted up. So obviously they had the benefit of gaining a better proficiency in English, but also their science results were lifted. There's, of course, positive gains in first language literacy development. I say, of course, because it's probably clear to us, but often, of course, this is an argument you often hear, of course, if we do it in a Clil program, if we learn subject matter in a language that is not our own language, isn't that taking away from the literacy development of the first language? But most research shows that the development of the first language actually benefits from learning in the second language. There's a meta-linguistic awareness, there's just a more of an engagement with language and literacy in general. And there's also heightened levels of intercultural awareness and competence. Oh, yeah. Now, today I need to kind of limit my what I'm talking about. And I'm defining Clil here as part of mainstream compulsory schooling provisions. And I'm not including Saturday or ethnic schools. There's quite a number of those schools available, and that's a research area in itself. Also, Clil programs do change from year to year. While this is a snapshot today, I cannot guarantee that all the Clil programs that I have researched as of today, as of this week, will actually be running next year. There's a lot of changes depending on are teachers available and so on and so on. So this is just me telling you, no guarantees given. Okay. One of the things that I promised to do today was to give everyone a snapshot of the available Clil programs in Australia. And first of all, I have to say, there are only Clil programs in these states, as far as I know. As far as I know, we have Clil programs in Queensland, in Victoria, in New South Wales, and in the ACT, in the Australian Capital Territory. I couldn't find any others. One of the problems around Clil is that there are no umbrella organizations. There are no bigger organizations that capture all those different programs across Australia. And you literally have to kind of find the Clil programs by searching on websites. Sometimes departments of education might have some information, but not actually in a satisfactory way, because you often find other schools that have Clil programs and haven't been captured there. So as far as I can see, these are the only available Clil programs. Now I'll just go into the first one. And I'll start, of course, with Queensland. So at the moment, currently, as far as I know, these are the running Clil programs in Queensland. There's 13 of them. This is the year in which they were established. These are the languages that they use. And this is their names and where they're located. If I couldn't squeeze it in, like this one, these ones are all in Brisbane area too, the bottom ones. So we can see from the Queensland example that it started off with French, and French was traditionally in Australia a second language that was being taught in schools, French and German. were the sort of traditional languages. So in the 1980s, they would have been around a lot of schools. The idea came from a French teacher, Michael Berthold, his name was, who was familiar with the French immersion programs in Canada. And he took that idea and wanted to create it himself and started a program in Benoa State High School, which is at the Gold Coast. It's still running. These are all programs that are still running. Then somebody from Benoa moved, a teacher was transferred to Mansfield and started one there. And so it went. If you actually look at the genesis of most of those programs, most of them were created by teachers who had already had some experience at another school or passed it on into another language and so on. So for example, in Kenmore, the German program, Michael Berthold was, knew the person who was teaching German in Kenmore and so on. So people tend to know each other in this area very much. So the languages that then followed were German and Italian and French. So we stayed in that kind of European language area. But later then, sort of like 20 years later, it actually moved over to Asian languages. And Chinese was the first one. Very successful program, still going really, really well at Varsity Lakes in Varsity College at the Gold Coast. That particular one is very interesting if you're interested in Chinese Clil programs, because it is connected to an acceleration program. So it has got 2 years of acceleration in year 6 and 7 before students actually go into the Chinese Clil in year 8. Because, I should quickly explain this, as you can see, almost all of these schools are SHS, which means state high schools. So the interesting thing about Queensland is that most of these schools, the absolute majority, up to here, are state high schools. And it was only in this year that two new primary school Clil programs were started. There was a long-running Japanese primary school program in Rockhampton at Crescent Lagoon State School in Japanese. 20 years, it ran for 20 years, and it was discontinued at the end of last year. So that was a very sad thing. I rang the principal, tried to find out what was happening there, and she basically said it was political changes and the changes in what was supported, basically. This year we had 3 new programs established, and this is after 6 years of nothing much happening. And even, the Rockhampton one even dropping out. So all of a sudden there's a burst of new Clil programs actually in Queensland. There was another school that was considering starting a French program. They didn't quite get off the ground, I think, this year, but they might do it next year. But as you can see, the new ones are all across languages again. One is in Italian, one is in Japanese, one is in Spanish. Now, Spanish came quite late to Australia. Spanish, a language that had been established across the world quite well, came to Australia as an actual force quite late, and also in terms of Clil programs. This was the very first Clil program in Indooroopilly State High School established in Australia, and one of the few schools that actually taught Spanish at that time. Now it's coming, but it was a latecomer. So this is what Queensland looks like. Victoria is quite interesting because Victoria is actually the biggest state in terms of Clil. Now, if you look at how Clil was established in Queensland over the years and actually continued over the years, Queensland is in a way the more successful state in continuing these programs, continuing quite a number of programs. All those most of the programs are in high school, so they start at year 8. They run from year 8, 9, and 10. So they're late onset, partial immersion program or late onset partial Clil program, whereas most of the Victorian schools are primary school programs. Some of them are very, very old. Bayswater South Primary School, that Clil program was established in 1981. So it was actually established before the Benoa one in Queensland. But interestingly enough, and I'll get to that in a second, Bayswater South was established out of a German community who were living around that area and were basically saying we would like a bilingual option for our children. So it was not predominantly a second language learning drive from the government or from parents, but it was actually a language maintenance and language transfer drive to establish this particular program. We do have quite a number of programs in in Victoria now, and I had to go over 3 different slides. So Victoria definitely has got the highest number of programs. It's also got the most variety in terms of languages. It has languages like, I'll just go back to the very first one. So it's got languages, Chinese, French. They also include Auslan, which is the sign language. They include that in their understanding of Clil programs. It's got Indonesian. It's got an Indonesian program, Spanish. It's also got Vietnamese, Macedonian, modern Greek. So the Vietnamese and the Macedonian one are very interesting because they, in a way, continue how Bayswater South started, namely as a community language initiative. So the one very interesting school, you might have heard of this school, Richmond West Primary School, teaches Chinese, has a Chinese program and a Vietnamese program. I visited them last year, and it was very interesting to talk to the principal the difference in the Chinese and the Vietnamese program. The Chinese program was predominantly non-Chinese speakers. Going into this program, they start with prep. So I saw them in year 5, and they were like chatting in Chinese, in Mandarin. I was really impressed. This was amazing. So this was the Chinese, predominantly non-Chinese speakers, like parents putting their kids into this program, hoping that their kids would pick up Chinese, and they did. It was wonderful. The Vietnamese program, 100% community speakers. 100%. So, it has a lot to do with which languages are offered, why are they offered, and so on and so on. And the Macedonian and Greek one is very similar. It's a community drive. We also have, we've got, so most of those that I said beforehand are public schools. That's the other thing. There's an interesting story developing what kind of schools offer Clil programs. Both in Queensland and in Victoria, it's mainly public schools, so state schools. We do have, however, also quite a number of Catholic schools which are picking this up now. And we have, St. Monica's and Xavier College are both Catholic schools, and St. Ignatius, which is starting an Italian program this year in Brisbane, is also a Catholic school. So it's being picked up by the Catholic school system. It's being very much picked up by the public school system, or by the state schools, but it's not so connected to private schools, to independent schools. When it is connected to independent schools, for example, the German primary school or Spatzenschule, which is part of the Turak primary school, then it is actually connected to an international schooling system. I will talk about that in a minute. Again, and not so much to independent schools or private schools as such. There is one exception in Queensland. The Glennie School in Toowoomba offers a Clil program. It's the only private school that offers a Clil program in Queensland, and that's in a rural setting, or sort of like not urban, not metropolitan. So there's maybe a story around that as well. I'm not sure yet. I have to see. New South Wales. This is the overview of New South Wales. And if you just look at the first part, you'll also notice what I noticed very quickly. Apart from the international schooling system, all of their programs are Asian. So this is the only Korean one in Australia, and they have Japanese, Chinese, and Indonesian. And the German ones, German, French, and Italian ones, the European ones, are part of the international schools. In the ACT, we have a very interesting Clil school, which is called Tilapia Park. This is a very good example for the merged curriculum. The whole school has got a merged French-Australian curriculum. If you're interested in this whole idea of merging the curriculum, that's the school to look at. There's a lot of information about the school online. They also have an Italian one, Yarralamla Primary School, that has started a few years ago. However, they kind of, particularly the people in Yarralamla, feel quite on their own because they're the only school in the ACT that does any Clil at all. Okay, so this is a snapshot. I think I've got most of it now, of all programs in Australia. And just in sheer numbers, this is what it looks like. This is across Australia. So there's 8 French programs, 7 German, 7 Italian, 7 Japanese, 6 Chinese, 3 Spanish, 2 Auslan, but this could be potentially many more. This is just because they're included in the Victorian ones, and I didn't really have time to look at how many more Auslan programs there are. There's 2 Vietnamese, 1 Greek, and 1 Macedonian one. So this is just a bit of a background, but it's interesting. It's pretty much evened out in terms of Asian. And I forgot the Korean one, didn't I? Yeah, I forgot the Korean one. There's 1 Korean one here as well. So we pretty much, if we add it all up, I think the European languages are still a little bit more than the Asian languages, but not by much. There's quite a lot of Asian programs as well. Okay, so a couple of interesting observations that I mentioned already in between. New South Wales emphasizes Asian languages. All European languages, Clil programs are in private schools. Programs across the board are overwhelmingly at public or Catholic schools. There's only 1 private school program in Queensland, for example. The private school which offers is often connected to the international schooling system or target global nomads, so people who come in, stay for a couple of years and then leave again. So there's a term for it. We call that usually global nomads. And languages offered cover second language learning, community languages, and global nomads. So this is interesting. This last point is interesting because that's often a little bit marginalized, that a lot of the programs, the Clil programs, do have target audiences, or I should say have participants from a whole range of different backgrounds pick up this option and go into Clil background. So it's not simply second language learners. It's more complex than that. Okay. So when we therefore look at Clil teaching in Australia, we need to look at second language learners. We need to look at first language maintenance and transfer. We also need to look at the specific Australian attempt to support and foster Clil programs in a climate of generally decreased interest in second languages. And there's no access to teaching materials in any language other than English. When I give this talk in Germany, people usually go, what? Because Clil in Germany is very, very big, of course, and it's mainly in English, and they have the complete curriculum in textbooks in English. So, what are the teachers doing when I have to tell them, well, the teachers have to translate all the teaching materials, all the curriculum into their languages. There's a lot of extra work, as you can imagine. So you're the Chinese science teacher in Varsity Legs. You spend your evenings translating the stuff into, yeah, it's huge. You were just thinking, I'm going to be a Clil teacher. Maybe not. No, I don't want to discourage you. But there's a lot of extra work. Okay, so if we look at the participants, there is a mixture of second language speakers, heritage speakers, and native speakers. We sometimes speak of heritage speakers, as you know, or background speakers. There's different types of terms that is used in this. This basically means that there are different language needs and cognitive progression that is required, that requires extensive scaffolding in these programs. You might have in a Clil program, you might have global nomad native speakers of parents who've come into Brisbane, know they're just going to stay for 3 years, are looking for some option for their children to continue their schooling in French, alongside with with beginning speakers of French in the same classroom. So this, of course, requires a lot, in addition to developing the teaching material themselves, the teachers also have to scaffold quite and differentiate in the classroom quite extensively. We also found that the Clil participants are often from middle-class backgrounds with aspirational parents looking for global engagement. There's often an exchange program connected to the Clil program. So there's this tangible way of actually having a way to use your language, go over and spend some time in Japan and so on and so on. Often they are also connected to programs of excellence, connected to high achieving expectations, and they are actually a form of streaming within mainstream schools. And that might explain why they have proliferated in public schools over private schools, because private schools in a way already present a type of streaming in the Australian schooling landscape. But within mainstream public schools, Clil programs proliferate, laptop programs proliferate, all these programs of excellence, which actually are streaming programs. And Clil participants are often screened and selected for academic achievement, which is funny because anyone could do Clil, but it's often connected to academic achievement. Okay. So this is basically a snapshot and an overview of what Clil looks like in secondary and primary schools in Australia. There were 2 tertiary programs in existence. Unfortunately, both of them not happening anymore. One of them was in Rockhampton, and the reason why that Rockhampton program at primary school eventually then died out might have been because the Japanese tertiary Clil program that they had at the university there also died out. So there wasn't that connection between sending the student teachers to the school to become, to get their practicum and so on and so on. So I forgot the name of the university. What's the name of the university in Rockhampton? Is it JCU? Or is it Central Queensland University? Yeah. Central Queensland University had a tertiary Clil program where they offered their teacher training, their 4-year teacher training, in a partial Clil Japanese setting. Something similar was also offered at some stage in, I think, Macquarie University in Sydney, also died out. So none of those tertiary Clil programs survived. Okay, so we now go over to research. So what's actually happening in terms of research around Clil programs in Australia? And the research approaches that I could see in my review of the research was basically around school settings, around teacher preparation, around student learning and engagement, and about multilingualism and related areas in general. So this one you might have come across already. This one is the research and evaluation of content and language integrated learning, approach to teaching and learning languages in Victorian schools. So this is a large research report developed at the University of Melbourne. Russell Cross is the main author together with Margaret Gearan, and they were asked by the government, by the Victorian government, to evaluate the Clil programs that were run as trials in 12 programs in Victoria, and to evaluate their their teaching approaches, their issues, their school settings, etc., etc. This is available online. You just have to type in the title, and I can give Paul the slides, so that it's all there anyway. And this gives a much deeper overview of the Victorian Clil programs. It has got 6 case studies across different languages, and it looks at strategies, it looks at teaching approaches, and it looks at what actually happens in those individual schools. Now, what did I do? I just have to quickly have a look what I did with it. Oh, yeah. So some of the research findings, and it goes into much detail, it's 130 pages long, so have a look if you're interested in that. But some of the findings, just some are summarized here, was that all Clil programs seem to have strong parental support. So the parents, if a Clil program continued on over a couple of years, the parents were an important force. They wanted it, they continued it, they encouraged their children, and so on. The interviewed students felt that Clil supported their overall schooling work and understanding of English and literacy. So this was one of the focus questions they had. And teachers developed a number of strategies and techniques for using Clil in practice that were common across classrooms in all cases. So why this was interesting is that because there wasn't actually there is no umbrella organization. Teachers are doing their stuff on their own, basically, in those Clil programs. They're doing it across a whole range of different languages. They often have to work by themselves. Yet, this report shows that they came up with very similar strategies and techniques to use Clil. Now, one of the reasons why they might have come up with very similar strategies was actually that the University of Melbourne, together with the Victorian government, is offering a degree in Clil. It's the only place in Australia that is offering a graduate diploma. It's a sort of, it starts with a professional diploma or whatever it's called. It's 2 courses. You can start with 2 courses. You have something like a professional diploma. You can have a graduate diploma, which is 4 courses, or it's also linked to a master's. And the Victorian government sponsored over 100 teachers. They paid for their degree because it was interested in upscaling the skills of primary school teachers who had language skills but were also qualified primary school teachers in delivering their content in another language. So we're going to have that in Queensland, let's hope, hey? I'm hoping! Okay. All right, so this was one area of research, the Victorian primary school programs. There's quite a bit of information about that research report if you want to go into more detail. I've also included one of my papers that is coming out in the Language Learning Journal, probably May, they said. The title is Soul Fighter Mentality, Stakeholder Agency in Clil Programs in Queensland. And that's really looking at stakeholders misspelled. Just teachers and program directors. Sorry. I just realized that. I was probably hungry or something. But then I still misspelled it, didn't I? Okay. Okay, so it's looking at stakeholder agency. So people involved in it, people who have decision makers in Clil programs. What can we say about them? And I'll just explain to you how I got to this before I show you the findings. This was part of a large-scale research project I did in Queensland, where I interviewed program directors, teachers, students. I did a survey with parents across 12 Clil programs in Queensland. So I'm publishing my research findings at the moment, and this is looking at teachers and program directors in particular. And what I found here was the paper concludes that Clil programs assist as individual programs without an umbrella organization supporting them, and that as a consequence, there's a necessity and mentality amongst program directors to fulfill more roles than just those of leading teachers, including advocacy, recruitment, and coordination of translations for teaching units. The paper makes two claims that stakeholder agency in Clil programs in Queensland is characterized by a sole fighter mentality, and that this mentality is fostered not only by a generally marginalized role assigned to second language learning, but also by contextual factors that merge language learning with language maintenance concerns in many existing Clil programs. So in other words, program directors and teachers have to take a lot of roles, and they often feel they're on their own. I regularly get emails from Clil teachers or Clil program directors and say, can you come out to our school? We don't really have any connections to anyone. And I usually go out and just sort of talk to people or give a talk to parents, you know, to reassure them that you're not on your own here. This is actually a growing movement. But there is still this sort of sense that there is not enough connection between people, because a lot of the Clil programs, there might only be 2 Clil programs in Italian. There might only be 1 in Korean. There might, you know, so you have to actually do a lot of the things by yourself. Go to the next one. I also published this paper called Languages, Cultural Capital and School Choice, together with Jesus Bergas-Paz, who is the director of the Spanish Clil program in Indooroopilly High, and we published it with Bob Lingard. Languages, Cultural Capital and School Choice, Distinction and Second Language Immersion Programs, or Clil programs. And our take on this one was actually, it was around school choice. And we actually found that based on the information that we could get from different schools across Southeast Queensland, it was often for the Clil schools, it was a marker of distinction for their school. It was seen as a value-added thing in their school, and they marketed the Clil program like that. We also found that there is a global policy context to such programs in respect to countries such as Spain, China, and Germany in supporting the teaching of their respective languages in nations around the world. In other words, the Confucius Institute, the Goethe Institute, the Cervantes Institute, which I pronounce this really badly now, I'm sure. I can't pronounce, I don't speak Spanish, sorry. So these are the big cultural institutions from their home government institutions. All of those institutions support Clil programs massively. The 2 German programs, for example, in Queensland, are part of an initiative called Partner Schools of the Future, which the Goethe Institute has initiated, which is, and they're the only 2 schools in Queensland and only 1 of 4 schools across Australia where the teachers get access to scholarships in Germany, access to PD, and so on and so on and so on. And the Confucius Institute and the Cervantes Institute do similar things for Clil programs. They really support these programs. There is an interesting publication by Leslie Harper, written by Leslie Harper and Ruth Fielding. This was about students in a French Clil program in Sydney, and they were examining bilingual and bicultural identity in young students. So they were looking at what happens amongst the students who are part of Clil programs. And they came up with basically this, where they said it was much, much easier for students to feel bicultural than to feel bilingual. There were lots and lots of stepping stones and lots of obstacles for them before they actually could say, I feel bilingual. Just conscious of the time. So we then come to ILA 2014. I hope you're all involved. Yay! Okay, good. So this is quite an amazing thing. We have the World Congress of Applied Linguists coming to Brisbane, 3,000 people. And just to give you an understanding how big this is, I ran into somebody who is high up in an organization called Brisbane Marketing. They're very much involved in preparing Brisbane for the G20 thing later in the year. And she was very much aware. She said they are always aware of conferences bigger than 500 people, but this particular one where 3,000 people are expected, they're very aware of it. They're developing things around the World Congress, and they actually have somebody from Brisbane Marketing is on the organization committee or works with the organization committee. So it is for Brisbane quite a big deal. Get involved, guys, if you're not yet, okay? Now, Clil, what's happening around Clil during the World Congress? There is a Clil symposium called Relationship of C and L in Clil, and this is was put forward by the Clil Research Network. You sometimes also see that as Clil REN. If you type that in, you find that, yeah. And there's a whole range of researchers. Some names you might be very familiar with if you're in this area. Rick de Graaf is quite well known. Ute Schmidt, David Lazar-Gabasta, you all know if you've ever read anything about Tessel. He writes a lot about English teaching. So there's quite a number of people on this, and this particular symposium is part of the World Congress, and we are taking part in a small group of Australian researchers as part of this symposium talking about the Australian situation. But we have 4 researchers and we only have 20 minutes across 4 people. So I'll be talking really, really fast, okay? I don't know what I'm going to say in 5 minutes, but anyway. All right, so this is one of them. And the other one, there's an invited symposium, Content and Language Integrated Learning, Clil as a catalyst for research cooperation in Europe and beyond, with these researchers. And this actually comes up when you go to the website and you go to the invited symposia. This comes up as the first one. So this is another area where you could go and find out more about this particular one. And this is pretty much what I had to say. I put on to the slides my publications in this area, which you can't read because of the color. But I'll give you the slides anyway. I'll give the slides to Paul, and he can distribute them if you want to. And these are some of my publications around Clil in Australia, if you're interested in this field. And that's all from me. Thank you.